Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us this morning. We're just going to give another 5 minutes for everybody else to join, but we're really excited to be having this discussion with you. Just letting a few more members in, and then we'll be starting soon, in about 5 minutes or so.
Million consumers in the past 4 weeks, and Cozy obviously came up top. So I'm pushing to
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us. We're really excited to be having this webinar with you all. I'm just going to hand over to our Executive Director, Nadia, to kick off the meeting.
Great, welcome. Thank you so much, Afense. Hi, everyone. We're delighted to have this very first youth-focused webinar as the National Association of Broadcasters. It's really an opportunity to have an interesting conversation with these incredible young people who have been really at the forefront of radio, focused on young audiences in our country. So it's absolutely wonderful to have Adrian Louw from Bush Radio, Dan Corder from 5FM, and the incredible Nia Brown, of course, from YFM. And we selected this very deliberately because we wanted to look at community broadcasting. And for those of you who don't know, Bush Radio is one of the oldest radio stations in South Africa. And it's always lovely to have our public broadcaster with Dan from 5FM. And Nia, we were just chatting earlier, the very first and only youth-focused commercial radio station in our country. So we're so excited to have the three of you here with us to give us an hour of your time. And the focus really is about powering radio through youth engagement. And I think today, Afense will facilitate this conversation, but really want it to be engaging. And for all of you who managed to log on to this MS Teams webinar, please feel free to show your love. I mean, some emojis, some, smiley faces, some applauding always helps, and it keeps the energy going. So welcome, welcome, welcome. And thanks to Afense for putting this together. And for NAB members, please look out for more webinars. It's great that we're still able to use this kind of hybrid engagement, and that we can just hop onto a call whilst we're sitting at our offices or wherever else we might be during this winter. So what we also wanted to say is thank you to every single one of you for the incredible work you do in this industry. I think you forget the power of this medium. You forget how relevant you are. You forget how you resonate with audiences, and you forget how you have been just taking us through the most tumultuous and difficult times in our country. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And I'll hand over to Afense.
Thank you, Nadia, and good morning to everybody. Thank you all for joining, and to our guests for availing themselves today and then just giving us an hour of their time. We really appreciate it. So to celebrate Youth Month, we're going to be looking at how best we can empower youth in radio broadcasting. We're also going to look at how young listeners and broadcasters power radio and keep the industry thriving. This is a very important conversation to have, especially as most of us know that radio marks 100 years in South Africa. And I personally believe that it's going to be up to the youth to power the next 100 years of radio. So without further ado, let me welcome our guest speakers. Adrian Louw of Bush Radio, Nia Brown of YFM, and Dan Corder of 5FM. I'm just going to quickly go through their bios, but I just want to reiterate what Nadia said, that this is a very much interactive session. So you are all welcome to leave your comments and questions in the chat box. So to our guest speakers, how are you all doing on this cold morning?
Good, thanks.
Great. So Nia Brown is a bold, free-spirited entertainer with varied industry experience. With 9 years in radio, her career started at the campus radio station Voice of Wits. She now hosts the breakfast show, #The Way Up, which airs between 5 and 9 a.m. on Gauteng's biggest youth station, YFM. And Nia Brown is also an actress. She studied a BA in Dramatic Arts at Wits University. And during this time, she starred in TV shows including Isibaya as Keisha, as well as Mutual Friends. She also played Cindy in Ayeye and Nomusa in the Mzansi Magic film Lit, #Lit. She is also an MC, a mixed DJ, and a voiceover artist as well. So that is the talented Nia Brown. And then on to Dan Corder of 5FM, sorry. Dan is the host of 5 Breakfast and has been with the station since April 2021. He studied at UCT and Rhodes University, and this man has had a very successful university debating career. Him and his speaking partner were crowned African champs and still hold this record for best performing African team at the World Championships. Dan quit debating to focus on radio during Roads Must Fall, and his show gained prominence for its coverage of the protests. So this led him to co-host the special edition of the BBC World Service, broadcasting all around the world. Through this, he gained industry attention and signed his first commercial radio contract at Good Hope FM at 21 years old. Dan spent 6 years at Good Hope FM before getting the call to host 5 Breakfast. So that is Dan. And then on to Bush Radio, we have Adrian Louw. He is the program integrator for Africa's oldest community radio station, Bush Radio. He has been involved with the station on various levels since 1994 and has also served as the media liaison to Parliament. He holds a national diploma in journalism from Cape Town University of Technology and is a fellow of the Salzburg Seminar in Media Ethics. He has received training in media management from Sveriges Radio in Sweden, Voice of America, and has also attended the Deutsche Welle Training Academy in Germany. Adrian has presented training courses for UNESCO and various radio stations on the continent, sharing his 29 years of program production and management skills with various organizations. He currently focuses on developing new media talent, and he'll speak to this later on, the use of technology to aid grassroots development, civic participation, and social change. So those are our guest speakers for today. Welcome, guys. Very glad to have you here with us. So I am going to kick it off with Nia Brown from YFM. Nia, YFM has the youngest commercial audience in South Africa. And what is radio's role in picking up trends in this market and connecting brands to young people?
I think, we are, the flagship youth brand. So one of our jobs is to kind of gain an understanding of what the current trends are. Our job is to find out what listeners want to hear, the conversations that they're having, the questions that plague their minds, because it's our role to ask those questions and to give them those answers. And I think that once we've kind of identified what the interests of our listeners are, our jobs are then to connect listeners with brands who share the same passions, who share the same questions, who want to gain an understanding of where young people are at, what their mindsets are like at the moment. And, brands often find that it's a little bit difficult for them to connect with their consumers, to connect with young people. And that's where we come in. We come in as the middleman to say, here's a brand that cares for young people, and here are young people who are looking for brands that care for them as well. So our responsibility is really to kind of figure out what the market is saying, what young people are thinking, but our responsibility is also, as why I think, to set the trends as well, right? As much as we are listening to our listeners and we're kind of gaining an understanding of where they're at, our job is also to set the trends. We're sparking conversations on a day-to-day basis with our listeners. We're giving them opportunities to see life a little bit differently, and we're giving them opportunities that helps them grow and nurture themselves, right? Brands are about speaking to different parts of the market, and our job here at Y is to cater to those different kinds of markets, cater to their interests, and to help them grow as young people in this country.
Perfect. Thank you, Nia. And Dan, a question for you. The country went through a huge shakeup with the COVID-19 pandemic. We've had to make changes here and there, regardless of the industry you're in. How has 5FM kept the youth engaged through this pandemic and beyond?
Hi, everyone. Firstly, I must quickly apologize. I'm actually on leave, so I'm not in as formal, professional, and beautiful offices as Nia or Adrian. But I've got this nice mirror, so you don't have to see how personal my Airbnb is right now. This is a really interesting question that I thought about a lot, because I actually started, at the beginning of the pandemic, I was on Good Hope FM, and then I moved to 5FM during the pandemic. And I think there are a couple of things that are incredibly important to remember. I always laugh at the fact that I was an essential service worker, just like my sister, who's actually a nurse. But during the pandemic, it was so important because we were essentially going in every single day, even in lockdown level 5, to fight fake news and to fight misinformation about vaccines and to fight conspiracy theories about what COVID was and where it was coming from. And I think this is unbelievably important to remember about how beautiful radio will basically always be, to be honest. Because radio's got an immediacy and like a lack of artifice, right? It's got a sincerity to it, because when you listen to radio, it feels like it's your mates in the car with you. Whereas on a TV screen, you can see the show has been made. It's on a screen. It's somewhere over there for you. Whereas radio is, and still in terms of advertisers, brands, and marketers, the most trusted medium that there is, because there's the least artifice. And so when we were going in during the pandemic and fighting fake news every single day, we were doing an incredible and a very, very important service to everybody who was listening. And I think the spike in radio listenership during COVID is indicative of the work that broadcasters all across the country were doing. And then just since COVID, to a more traditional idea of like radio programming outside of a historic pandemic, I think what 5FM does incredibly well, because we are the national youth radio station of the country, our explicit mandate is to appeal to and inspire and nurture young people across the country, is what we do really well is open up the industry. Because we all know that the radio industry is actually incredibly small, despite our enormous, enormous audience, because our radio market does have many dozens of big radio stations, but they're divided by language, by location, by culture, by ethnic and cultural interest. And so there are actually not a lot of jobs per language group, per area, per region. And radio is very, very often incredibly difficult to get into. And what I love about 5FM and their attempts and our attempts to engage young people and give them opportunities is how hardcore we are about putting young people on the radio. Our latest example right now is that for Youth Month, we created another radio station, as if it wasn't enough to just have one radio station. We created an actual fully functioning 24/7, fully programmed digital radio station from scratch that you can that people have been listening to in their droves through the 5FM app. And it's just like a radio station. It's got music 24/7. It's got only music created by people under the age of 25, which is radical, because very often you can only get on the radio as a musician after many years, and you're older than 25 by the time you get on. And even cooler than that, all of the shows hosted on 5 Extra are campus radio presenters who are guest hosting in whole shows from across the country. I think there are people from CUTFM today. We had Voice of It yesterday, UCT Radio the day before. And I'm really proud of that. And the SABC's got an amazing track record of doing that. When I was at Good Up FM, and I think they still do it every so often, and it's often sponsored. I think when I was there, it was by MTN, but it's Campus Presenter Search. And the winner of Campus Presenter Search gets a contract at Good Up FM and literally becomes a broadcaster and gets a show. And I just think that that's amazing. And it's testament to how hardcore the SABC is about opening up the industry, and particularly 5FM about giving young people a platform. Because when people say that young people don't listen to the radio, I often think that's, firstly, data-wise, that's not true. But secondly, well, if you're only going to make radio by old people for old people, then you can't be surprised if young people don't want to listen. You've got to make radio for young people, and the best people to do that are young people. So that's my answer.
Thank you so much, Dan. That is very encouraging to hear, especially the bit about, radio taking on digital and moving on with the times. It just shows us how much radio lives and the impact that the youth has in keeping it alive. So just to get a community radio perspective, I'm going to move on to Adrian now. With Bush Radio being renowned as South Africa's oldest community radio station project, in what ways has the influence of young people kept your station thriving?
I think what is important and Dan and Nia have mentioned it, is that young people drive change. I think that's important to recognize. And a station like Bush Radio, the people involved in the station are generally quite young. So I was very happy when Nadia said, group me with these young people, because I've been doing this for quite a while. I think on various levels, young people influence the programming of the station. because the same people involved in the station are involved in program content and that sort of development. So you have a situation where, if I go back in history, 1995, when Bush was first legally licensed, you know, we were the only station nationally playing Kwaito when Kwaito started. And that was because it was young people running the afternoon drive time show. You see that in the influence of our music currently. Yacht music, which is remixed, Cape Flats music with a little bit of gom sometimes, is actually very popular. And what we do and what the young people do is actually carry that across to your commercial stations, to your public broadcaster, where they suddenly realize that, hey, there's an audience here. So in many ways, community radio and a station like Bush Radio is really a test bed and an incubator for that talent that moves on. We do not have big budgets. We do not have, you know, I was told this morning, Dan commented on our fancy studio. It was actually the young people who said, please, Adrian, dress properly for this. You're going to be with young people. You know, I normally use the excuse of, oh, I'm blind. So they made me get a haircut yesterday. They made me, you know, wear something that looks presentable. And that's the influence of the station in a day-to-day basis. You know, the average age is 25. However, for us, it's always merging the two. You know, the experience with new ideas. As I've progressed at the station, my job has become to say yes. And the young people come up with crazy ideas. Ideas we don't have money for or the resources for, but, you know, we try and facilitate their development and their dreams. And that influences throughout the station, from programming content, through to management, through to designing of equipment, through to what we put on social media. That's very much driven by young people. And I think that's important to know. The reason Bush Radio is considered innovative and dynamic is not because of the old people involved in the station. It's because of the under 35s at Bush Radio.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Adrian. Now back to brands, Nia. You know, the youth market is such a complex one, comprising people with different interests. How best can radio broadcasters cater to such a diverse audience?
I think when we first look at the ages in which you would consider youth, right? We're looking at least Y looks at the 15 to 34-year-olds. And I think our job as a station is to try to cater for the different interests, the different moments that someone might experience as they're growing from 15 years old and as they're growing up to become 34-year-olds. And I think one way in which broadcasters can cater to such a diverse audience, which I think is honestly the most exciting thing about being a broadcaster, is that you're talking to different kinds of people all the time. It's very exciting. No one's opinion is exactly the same. But I think the way in which broadcasters can cater to such a diverse audience is to, first of all, be comfortable with the fact that you're not going to cater to your entire audience at one particular time, right? The best way to kind of connect with the market is through shared experiences, right? As a radio broadcaster, you talk about your experiences, and that's how you connect with the experiences of your listener. For example, because we're South African, everyone's mom has had a Tupperware issue at some point. Everyone's mom has shouted at them for not bringing the Tupperware back at the house. Another example is, for example, every South African has either hosted or been to a braai, for example, right? And those are the kinds of examples that kind of showcase the commonalities, the relatability that a broadcaster can have with their listeners. We do come from, you know, different backgrounds. We have different races. We have different religions. But one thing that does connect us is the fact that we are South Africans, and there are certain experiences, certain things about being South African that only we can speak on. No one else in the world can share those experiences. And I think that as a broadcaster, once you find that commonality, once you find that thread, you've got gold.
Perfect. That is so true, Nia. You know, Dan, earlier on, we spoke about radio experiencing a spike during lockdown. So, as 5FM, have there been shifts you've been seeing? I think even before lockdown, in the radio programs young people are most likely to engage in?
So that's a really interesting question. I truly believe that if you make, what's that old phrase? If you make it, they will come, right? And I just think it's actually very, very simple and very straightforward, is that if you make radio for young people, then they will come and they will listen. I mean, I think there's a particularly unique problem in talk radio in the country, just as a side note, because they say young people aren't engaged or not interested or not thinking or don't want to vote. And none of those things are true. In fact, all over TikTok, you see young people making interesting things for young people about the news, about current affairs, with great analysis and politics and interest, and they've got millions of views. And so my answer is very similar to the earlier one, which is that if you create radio for young people by young people will listen. There's some incredible shows, particularly on Mhlobo Wenene. There's a show, and another one, I think, on Ukhozi, if I remember correctly, which is hosted by very, very young people who were given opportunities, and young people resonate with that and came along. I think on 5FM we are experiencing something really interesting, which is a very significant mustering of young people in the last few years, and I'm not surprised by that at all, because our station manager made it an explicit mandate and motive to go out and to create a much younger lineup, and that yielded almost instant response from listeners. Because people were speaking the language of latter-day millennials, or older Gen Zs, and people responded to that. But it's also about not just the presenter, but the programming itself. So Nia spoke about it earlier, but if you create specific content pieces and specific content strategies for young people, then you get young people to listen. It's unbelievably simple, actually. Like Sanela Potalwa, who hosts 5 Lunch, has a Campus Connect feature where she speaks with university students all the time, and she gets university students on the radio. And I mean, there's no wizardry there. University students listen in their droves to 5 Lunch, and 5 Lunch is ever growing and great numbers, if you know what I mean. On our show, on 5 Breakfast, we have very, very, very strong listenership from kids in cars who are the next generation of radio listeners. And it's incredibly important to focus explicitly on young people for at least 15 minutes a show or at a different time, because they are the ones who are on TikTok and Spotify and watching television. And so they're the ones who you really have to convince that radio has something for them. But if you do, then you have them for the next 10, 20, 30, 40 years. And so when we really, really in a serious way take the time to create whole features, like we've got Kids Weather Report, we've got karaoke, and every single day you're getting dozens and dozens of young people from different cities all across the country, many of them are high school students, it pays dividends and it gets yield. So if you're trying to create content also that you want to sell to a brand as being young people, you got to make it for them and be fine with that. The trick is to make it entertaining enough that even though only young people on the radio, the older folks who are listening go, that was funny, I can sit through this again. And that's the real art.
Thank you, Dan. So Adrian, earlier on, Dan spoke about, radio's role in fighting fake news and how it is so important to bring credible information to people. And we know that community radio is very important in providing this useful information, especially to the youth. Now, can you share the different ways that Bush Radio has had an impact in this regard on young people?
Well, specifically around COVID, if we were to raise COVID as an issue, we saw a lot of direct interaction in studio with people actually WhatsApping and asking very basic questions. Whether it's around the vaccine, and we played a very strong, like many community radio stations and other radio stations, when Dan was speaking about misinformation, people asked questions. And I think a lot of the times, for instance, when we had the premier or somebody from the health department in studio, we actually found that a lot of young people contacted us after the program. So we spent quite a bit of time after shows or after an interview providing that service. Where do you get the right information? What is happening? That sort of thing. I think also what is important for stations to realize, and I'm quite happy that people like Dan and Nia are involved in stations, because it's important that besides seeing young people as a commodity, they also have the notion that young people aren't interested in politics, the notion that they aren't is, I've been warned not to swear because I do that often, is absolute nonsense. They care. If we mess up as older folks, what do they have to inherit? The youth is not the future. The youth is active right now in making those changes. And I think if I look at Bush's history in terms of getting young people involved in drafting the code of conduct, the United Nations conduct for child broadcasters, we had kids heading towards New York when a couple of planes flew into 2 tall buildings. They were about to give a speech at the UN. Whether it's something like that on that level of strategic discussions on a global level, through to something where we brought artists like Reddy D and Godessa and a couple of other hip hop groups together because we sort of felt, hang on, there's a lot of misogyny and this, that, and the music that we have to play. Let's deal with HIV and AIDS around it. We had workshops upstairs, people were involved. We went to schools on a regular basis. And that led us to receive the New York Programming Silver Medal. So the benefits to stations, I think, of actually engaging youth and using them in the station is important. Old people mustn't be scared of young people. I think that's key. Your station will only benefit from actual involvement of young people. And I can give you a very practical example. We have something called Children's Radio Education Workshop, which we started in 1996. They are answerable to me. The 6-year-old is answerable to me. They raise issues of content. They discussed at one stage when when corporal punishment was banned, and there was this big discussion in studio with 10 kids going, yeah, no, our mommy should give us a hiding if we're naughty. And I was listening to this at home going, oh crap, that's illegal. Called the studio, they put me on hold, and they went, Adrian's there, he's calling. I think that's important, that they get treated as part of the station, and that goes for all levels of the station. It's not just merely your on-air talent. The creativity, the ideas that young people input into the station, I think, is one of Bush Radio's key successes. I don't think the station would exist if it wasn't for the young people. But there's more to that. There needs to be a merging of the experience and the developing the young talent. But we also need to think about it in terms of the management of the station, people getting involved in broadcasting on various levels. And I think that's key. And I think many stations don't do that. Getting people, mentoring people properly, getting them skilled, sending them out, because I'm lucky when I have to program, money is not my major concern. Although it's nice to keep the lights on. Dan wrote a very interesting article about us a few years ago. And he knows, he's been here, he's seen the energy of the young people. And I think that's important.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Adrian. And yeah, I'm just encouraged by hearing all of this, seeing how much all these stations involved today are very much youth focused. I'm also seeing the comments in the chat box, and I just want to say to everybody, keep them going. We just, want to encourage as much participation as possible. So yeah, Dan, you raised an important point there. We need to keep the lights on as broadcasters. So I have a question now for Nia Brown. How can radio stations across the board, whether it's commercial or community, how can they use the power of youth to keep themselves sustainable?
The words that come to my mind immediately are, first and foremost, listen to your listeners. If you support your listeners, they will support you back in every way possible. I think market research can be incredibly helpful in that way as well, in trying to find out what the mindset is of the listeners, so that you as a station and as a broadcaster can place yourself in a position where you are able to give them the support that they need, right? Make an example. For example, we hosted an event this past weekend called Grind. And Grind was really all about contentpreneurship. It was about side hustles. It was about upscaling your business as well. And this is because as why we realized that because the country is in the position that it is right now, because we've got such high unemployment rates, traditional jobs are not a viable option for young people anymore. People are struggling to find jobs. People are sending in CVs every single day, but they are struggling to come up with something. But what we do know is that young people of today really do want to make a difference in their own lives. They want to make a difference in the country. They want to be able to contribute to the economy of the country. So we have to get a little bit creative with it, right? And that's where things like contentpreneurship, social media kind of comes into play. And that's why we hosted an event like Grind, is to say to young people, well, this is not an option anymore, but we do have something that works. Let's bring in some social media creators who have managed to create jobs from social media, some people who have managed to start their own businesses and are, incredibly successful at it. Here are some tips and tricks on how you can kind of upskill your business and get it to the next level. And by doing that, you're saying to your listener, look, we care about you. We care about you wanting to grow. We care about you wanting to get your life on the correct path. And just like you, we're trying to find new and creative ways to give you that kind of information. And when you give your listeners that kind of support, I promise you they will give you that support back. And that's how you kind of sustain it. More than anything, is the relationship that broadcasters and stations have with their listeners.
Thank you, Nia. And I think you use such a good example of Grind. I just saw the posters, all over Joburg, the social media posts. And I see all of you have all been involved in, getting the youth moving and shaking. So then what are some notable SABC radio campaigns that have encouraged similar public participation among the youth?
I think I got too excited about the pre-sent questions and mentioned many of the answers all in my first response. But I think what SABC Radio does tremendously well amongst the youth is SABC Radio takes very seriously that one of our key mandates is information, another one is education, and the third pillar is entertainment. And we have an extraordinary listenership across the SABC. It's 19 radio stations at the moment, as well as online. It's like 77% of market share. It's tens of millions of people. And many, many, many of them are young people, particularly at 5FM. And I think that's like when it's specifically trying to get young people involved, it's by being in the middle of the conversation. Because, so for example, our very, very well publicized Get the Nation Vaxxed initiative was incredibly important. It was incredibly important to tell young people, hey, we need you to come and get vaccinated. We are partnering with vaccination sites. 5FM Breakfast, our show, our first big campaign was we flew across the country and across to different cities, and we broadcasted live from vaccination sites with DJs, and we tried to make it a party and a vibe so it would actually be fun to go and get vaccinated. But young people have a particular talent, which is the ability to discern nonsense from not nonsense on the internet. I'm actually pretty proud of young people's ability to be able to understand the internet. And so it's often about going on air for us and saying, hey guys, we have this particular superpower to help the rest of the country with disinformation and with confusion about what's real and what's not. So a lot of our COVID campaign to get the nation vaccinated was about saying, hey, you have the ability to go to your grandparents, because those aunties WhatsApp groups are incredible. The things that become true on grandmothers and grandfathers kind of like Facebook profiles are extraordinary. And only young people in families, in homes, have the ability to go and say, hey, listen, I've thought about this, and this is fake news, and that's clearly a screenshot, and that's Photoshop, and that's AI generated. And so what the SABC tries to do, and particularly 5FM, is to say, young people, you have the power right now. And I think Adrian was exactly right. Young people are already here. It's not like we're waiting for them. The future is now, is what I always say on our show. And so what we try to do is encourage young people and make them understand how powerful they already are and how they are already able to affect extremely, extremely significant change. The second thing I wanted to say was, and it's similar to what Nia said, which I think was absolutely right. Nia, I pointed to the ceiling because you're above me on my screen, but if you're not, sorry about that. Slightly confusing. But I think that what the SABC does very well, similarly to why, and I'm sure Bush, is to think very deeply about the life stage of the listener. So obviously, youth radio is going to, or youth focused and youth pursuing radio is going to focus on the life stage of the listener. So when we talk about trying to get young people to listen to 5 or to the SABC, we think, right, finishing school, are they going to go to university? Are they going to hit the job market? Struggling through university to survive it? Finishing university, do you have student loans? Are you looking for your first job? Or are you looking for your second job? Do you even know what jobs are available to you? And that's where the SABC, and I'll punt myself one more time, but 5FM is very good at thinking about that very carefully. So just on my show, we have 2 dedicated features. And when you speak to appealing to brands, keeping the lights on, and monetizing content that is good for young people, this is a great example. The first one is Show Me the Money, because a specific problem that we find in many industries is no matter what the career guidance counselor tells you, you don't actually come out of university knowing that much about how likely it is for you to get a job in what you've studied. If you get a job in that career, what kinds of jobs within that industry are available to you, how much money you're likely to be paid, and what skill sets you achieve. And so on Show Me the Money, we get listeners to anonymously message in if we say we're going to talk about plumbers today or something like that. People who are already plumbers to tell us what is the real state of affairs there, to give people the information to then be able to go out and make change. The second content feature that we have that is, again, very sellable is living sustainably, because all the market research says that young people are very worried about living sustainably now in terms of money and living sustainably in terms of the planet, because we'd really like to enjoy a livable planet for the next 60 or 80 years that we are going to be lucky enough to be on this planet. And so we dedicate features where we talk to and ask young people what they're worried about, and then spend a lot of time talking about it to enable young people to have stronger, better equipped lives with information and the inspiration that we can provide.
Thank you, Dan. Now, Adrian, COVID-19, what has been its impact on your station, negative or positive, or both?
I think on a positive side, a captive audience during the height of lockdown. I think, yeah, I mean, the numbers prove that across the board for stations. I think also the innovation that it created, being a resource poor station, I think our teams, our production teams, the young people specifically, embrace technology very quickly, whether it was doing Vox Pops via WhatsApp or sending, voice notes through to the studio. I think they really embrace the technology in terms of making sure we get our messages out, getting responses. So that was a very good part of lockdown. What we have seen dramatically, and that kind of echoes a little bit of what Dan said about jobs. I mean, we have something called Job Shop, and our mid-morning presenter actually spends at least 2 hours after the program just WhatsApping people jobs. We've seen a dramatic increase in that, and he does it because, well, it's not part of his duties, but he sits afterwards getting on the WhatsApp and forwarding all these people that have requested jobs. Getting somebody to buy in, we had a big cell phone network that bought into that idea for a short while, but it hasn't been a long-term thing, although we keep doing it. We're dealing with 600-700 WhatsApps in an hour, just asking, all they have to do is WhatsApp the word Job Shop, and Kusi sits here and, him or one of the other interns forward the job. So yeah, we've seen the negative impact of COVID on society, but I think also in terms of us as a station, we've seen the positive, whether we had basic internet where we had people in various areas of the Cape Flats using Zoom to do a live program. I think that was very interesting to see, and it really helped. And I think, again, it showed the credibility of radio. It showed this is a source that people could believe. That needs to translate, especially for community radio, needs to translate into businesses supporting community radio. I think because our people that are on air are exactly the same people we serve, there's a buy-in and a believability that unfortunately many bigger stations don't have, that they struggle with. We have that as a resource, and we have the airtime. I think commercial entities need to realize that that's a good selling point for their product if they link with many community radio stations on that. And it slowly happened during COVID. And I think we as community radio need to sort of keep up on that. We saw that with, local government coming on board after many years of negotiating. I mean, if you look at the Western Cape really struggled. The community radio stations really struggled to get buy-in from the local government. During COVID, they realized, hang on, this is what people are listening to. This is where people believe the information. So that slowly continued in the Western Cape. Nationally, I don't know, but definitely in the Western Cape, that was a positive that came out of COVID.
Thank you, Adrian. And I believe, radio keeps proving how credible it is. And I think a lot of listeners appreciate that. But, Nia, we face a, significant competition from emerging podcasters. And in light of this, how do we as radio broadcasters keep our share of the youth audience?
I've never really understood this comparison with podcasts and radios. I don't get it. But I understand why people like to compare the two. Honestly, I don't think that podcasts are a threat to radio. I think that podcasts are an extension of radio, right? Radio is live. Radio is happening right now. Radio is instant. And there is absolutely nothing that can replace that. Why? Because it gives listeners an opportunity to be part of the fabric of the station. It gives listeners an opportunity to feel as though they are part of why, that why cannot exist without them. And that is the truth, right? But I think what happens with radio as well is that it has the opportunity to, for example, if you're doing a link and the link is 3 minutes, that's it. You've got 3 minutes to do a link on radio because there's other things that you need to take into consideration. There's ads, there's music that needs to play. But you might, as a station, decide that, let's extend this 3-minute link and create a podcast that can live digitally where we can kind of have an extension of this conversation that we're having. So a listener might decide, okay, while I'm on my way to work, I'm going to listen to the radio in the car and I'm going to listen to The Way Up with Nia Brown. But I also know that when I get back home, in case I've missed anything, I can listen to Y's podcast about the very same topic. So I think that the two can absolutely coexist. I think that listeners can decide to listen to traditional radio and also listen to podcasts at the same time. It really just depends on what people's interests are. And I think we live in 2023, so they can have an interest in both. It really is just about personal connection and finding different ways to connect with your listeners and finding different ways to speak to them. Like, for example, our reach here at Y is over 13 million. We have a reach of over 3 million, 3 million listeners that we connect with on different platforms. We connect with them on the station. We connect with them on digital. We connect with them on social media. And we've done podcasts in the past as well, which have proven to be extremely successful because that's what our listeners want. And either you join them or you get left behind. So, yeah.
Thanks so much, Nia. That's such a great response. And I mean, it speaks to the adaptability of the platform of radio, It continues to show that it's something that you can take with you anywhere you go. Yeah. So then For young radio broadcasters just entering the space, what are some typical challenges that they face?
Thank you. I will answer that in a second, but I just want to congratulate and echo Nia on that, because I actually run a very successful podcasting company creating podcasts for clients. And it's just, I'm just amused when people think that anything is going to replace radio. You know what I would love, and I'm so glad that we are all here as radio people. I would love it if we all just shook off this bizarre insecurity that maybe radio is dying, because it's just not. The Buggles video killed the radio star came out in 1980, and you know what? The only thing has died since then is video. When was the last time you had a video in your hands? Like, every single key audience measure of radio in the whole world confirms this. The most competitive, and sorry, I know I'm jumping academically here, but I did honors and masters research on radio. So the most competitive media market in the world, with the strongest podcasting, digital, streaming, video, anything you like, is the United States. And do you know what radio penetration is there per week? 96%. 96%, guys. We all just need to have a quiet confidence and a self-security. And you can look at the South African radio listenership too and go, everybody get over yourselves. Like, we are not just still alive. Radio is thriving, people. I just wanted to say that. I really needed to say that. And Nia, you're exactly right. Live cannot be beaten. A podcast is for a different function, about hearing about something else. But secondly, something that our radio station does extremely well is South African content, which, like, yeah, we're competing with world-class international brands and audiences, but who else is going to talk about Ace Magashule better than us, or Thabo Bester? You know what I'm saying? Okay, so that's just what I wanted to say quickly, because I'm sorry offensive, but that triggered me a little bit. Anyway, we're back.
No problem. Thank you, Dan. Appreciate it.
No worries. The challenges facing young people trying to get into radio are many, I must say this. And I commend Adrian, and I loved writing that article for Africa as a Country on Bush Radio, because I think you guys do a very good job of giving young people opportunities. But I think that the significant difficulty for young people is getting on the microphone at all. Because unfortunately, the only way that you're going to convince anybody in the world to give you their microphone is to show them what you've done on another microphone. Because the thing about radio is, it's so high risk. I always think about it like an airplane, because it's live. No matter how much you do to be risk averse and future proof yourself as a manager, the second a microphone opens and someone's talking, they can do anything with the plane, guys. They are holding the steering wheel. They can go the plane straight down or straight up. And whenever you think about somebody going on the mic, you think, how much of a flight risk are they? Quite literally. Can you trust them to not burn your brand to the ground or do something horrifically damaging, or even just be good? And so the only way to convince a manager that you are trustworthy enough and good enough is to send them a demo tape that's not a pre-record. It's you doing thousands of hours of radio. And so you need as a young person to be given the opportunity to do that in a safe environment where you can screw up, you can be good, you can be bad. And what I worry about sincerely and deeply is, and particularly COVID caused this, is the closure of a lot of community radio stations and the suffering in quality of a lot of campus radio stations, which means that when I look at the radio landscape now, it's hard to see. There are many fewer places giving opportunities to young people to get on the mic and to prove themselves, so that they can then send a demo tape of actual radio work that they've done on a public broadcast frequency, and send it to a real employer, and sorry, not a real employer, but like a commercial employer, and say, look, you can trust me on this microphone. Look, all I want is for you to let me do this thing that I'm already doing there. And I really hope that more radio stations take seriously the fact that you need to give opportunities to young people to get tested on the microphone. Because something else that I think that many people don't realize is that doing live radio is incredibly challenging. To be able to at any moment open your mouth when, like, the desk has failed, or there was a swear word in a song, or a caller says something horrific, or a line drops, you need to be able to handle any unexpected externality at any and all times for 3 hours a day. It's so wild how much pressure that live element is. And the only way that you can learn how to do that, no one is born with the talent to handle that. The only way to learn how to do that is to do thousands of hours on the microphone. And the only reason why I am where I am and Nia is where she is because somebody let us do that and make mistakes and mess up a lot. And so the way to get young people into the industry is to have stations like Bush Radio doing the good work and being brave and letting people learn the craft. And I really hope that COVID hasn't permanently set back our industry. And with all of these closures and this drops in quality of lots of campus stations, because that would be a really significant loss to the industry.
Thank you so much, Dan. I've got one last question for Adrian, but first I see Noto posted one in the chat box, and then anybody can answer this. With the limitation in available spectrum, what do you guys think are the possibilities of introducing digital radio, DAB and DRM? So anybody can answer, not just the participants. You're welcome.
I'm happy to say something quick on that. I think that obviously there have been some very significant and high profile online radio projects that have had varying degrees of success. We think of Thibaut Touch and Gareth Cliff most significantly in South Africa. I think that some of the work that needs to be done is to kind of, and also I guess with 5FM Extra now that I mentioned earlier, but I think the crucial work that needs to be done is infrastructural work in the audience, which is essentially to make the audience, to teach South African audiences that there's a radio station in their pocket on their phones. Because I don't think that those, like the attempted online radio projects have had mixed track records based on the quality of the content. I think it's because of the fact that digital radio is radically new to a South African audience. And I think that the way of using and interacting with digital radio just needs to be taught, and then it's very possible.
Yeah, and just to add on that as well, Dan, I definitely think that that's one of the issues, but I also think realistically speaking, while digital radio feels like the direction in which radio is moving, and it does feel like it might be a good idea, many of young South Africans still face the challenge of data. So we really don't have access to digital radio because we cannot afford to buy the data. And I mean, with Wi-Fi and everything, it's cool. But if you're looking at a young kid in Soweto, they might not want to spend their money on data listening to digital radio. They might want to spend their money on printing out CVs and getting themselves a job. So I think that that's the difficulty when it comes to digital radio.
Yeah, I have to agree. The cost of communications in South Africa is one of the highest globally. You can get 10 rands worth of you can get a gig of data in Kenya for like 5 rand. That is a major stumbling block to the success of online radio and a complement to traditional FM radio. I think, I have my own feelings about the progression and the delays with digital audio broadcasting, etc. But
teacher, if you know,
let's look at addressing the cost of communication in South Africa across the
which is fine.
Somebody has their mic on, please put it off.
Yeah, Adrian, you can carry on.
Yeah, so for me, it's addressing the cost of communication in South Africa in general. The frequency plan, I mean, there's a concern about limited spectrum. It's a bit of a misnomer. It's something I've been dealing with since 1993. It's hogwash that we don't have more stations, but it's also a financial thing. Look at stations in Lisbon, in Argentina, the amount of FM stations alone. South Africa made certain agreements around digital broadcasting. Now we're trying to fulfill it. There's a lot of things in our past which we should have renegotiated. 1990 wasn't always the best plan moving forward. And these are having, they're coming back to roost now. Cost of communication, bring it down. Where is our information hosted? All those things need to change. And, again, I'm confident that young people are doing that. Where are they hosting their information? Where are they sharing their information? How are they accessing information? How are they engaging? that's the way forward.
Thank you so much, Adrian. And then I just have one last question for all of you. What does the future of youth and radio look like? And what are some ways in which we can support young people who want careers in the sector? So I think we'll start with Nia, then go on to Dan, and then Adrian, you can close it off.
I think the future of broadcasters and radio is incredibly bright. I think today's generation are so fascinating to me because this is a generation that is not afraid to speak their truth and to voice their opinions. And I think that is something that we do have in radio, but I'm excited to hear what the young people of today had to say, and what the future of radio is looking like. I think that they're definitely going to blow our minds, and I think that the future of radio is also going to contain broadcasters who are all about action. They are not just about giving people advice, but they're about going out there and getting people to actually learn something and being a part of the youth's growth in the country. So I think it's incredibly exciting, the future of broadcasting, and I can't wait to hear it all.
Thanks, Nia. Dan?
The way to get young people in radio is to give them work in radio. Something that the SABC does incredibly well is this extraordinary internship program at management level, which gets literally hundreds of young people working in radio stations across the organization every single year, hundreds. And they quite often get jobs because they deserve them after the internship. So a wonderful colleague of mine, his name is Vutomi. He was an intern last year, and we're getting new interns soon. He was an intern as part of the intern class of 2022. Did outstanding work, and he's been hired as a digital assistant now, and he's crucial to the operations of the station. And I think that what is incredibly disappointing about all labor markets is that there's this bias towards older people because young people don't have experience, which is honestly just so silly to me, particularly the fact that in the last 20 years, the world has undergone a technological revolution, the likes of which hasn't been seen in over 100 years. And so work has been done in a very similar way for about 100 years, but in the last 15, it's completely changed. And when you're trying to appeal to audiences of all ages, you need to have young people who are digitally, internet and content proficient and smart to be involved in the creation process. And so I commend the SABC. I can't wait to meet this year's interns. I think they'll be brilliant because a handful go to each radio station, which is amazing. And also TV and accounting and administration, all the levels of the broadcaster, which is incredible. And so I just think give people the opportunity and realize that you're hiring talent and hunger and freshness, and they can learn the skills. Just give them a month and they'll be just as good, if not better than you. And that's, as Adrian said earlier, where the innovation comes from.
Perfect. Thank you, Dan. Adrian, your thoughts?
From my side, it's more appeal to the older folks, the management level, the strategic thinking. Age, to quote a movie, actually, age is no guarantee of efficiency, and youth is no guarantee of innovation. However, bringing those two together and creating platforms where those two can meet, you're guaranteed of success in assisting youth, but also growing your markets if necessary.
Thanks so much, Adrian. We're slightly over our time, but I think that just shows how engaging this conversation was. We can take a quick round of questions, starting with Noto. I saw you had your hand up earlier, so you can go ahead and ask your question.
Thanks, Offense, and thanks to the panelists. I think just to add on to my question earlier, so it was specifically around, so when you look at FM as a technology, is that especially around the metros, you find that currently, regardless of how we got here, there's literally not available spectrum for any new stations to come on, especially around the cities, right? So, and that's because FM in and of itself, it's an analog medium. So now when you introduce digital, it means, so for example, to take YFM's frequency in Joburg is 99.2. So with DRM or DAB, that 99.2 frequency, with DAB Plus, we've done some tests where you can have 18 radio stations using that same frequency. So you're really surfing not by frequency. Now all you do is scrolling by the station name, right? So there you get what's called spectrum efficiencies. You are able to have more stations using less frequencies, right? Now the challenge with this thing, it's always a chicken and an egg situation. The radio listening devices out there throughout the world, most of them are FM, and it's a historical thing. For us to introduce any of the digital technologies, we need to ensure that the people out there or the listeners have compatible devices. So what I'm wondering, and it's been for a number of years, a question to say, how do you introduce this sort of new technology? How do you ensure that devices are in the market at the correct price, so that you don't lose your listenerships? And is there really, is there hunger for it? Do we still need more stations, which I think there is room for more for growth? And yeah, basically, how do we ensure that the market has these devices available? Thanks.
If I may, do what we did with Nokia back in the day when Nokia wanted to remove all the FM receivers, force them to keep it. That was a global campaign. Yeah, that's in a nutshell. I mean, the cost needs to come down. Use the technology. Let us determine the needs and create the technology to fulfill that, not the other way around. Don't let products lead us.
I also, if I could just add on there as well, I think as why what we've also tried to do was to give listeners the option, right? So we've got a Y app where people can download the app on their phones and they can listen. And the amount of data that it uses is very, 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 very minute and small and little, which is very exciting because that means that they're not spending a lot of data while listening to Y. And this is, I think, a decision by the station to say that there are some listeners that, first of all, might want to listen to their favorite show on the go, but also some listeners that might not have the traditional FM radio, but still want to be able to listen to Y. So I think there is opportunity for stations to kind of combine those two in the same way that Y has, to say, yes, we've got the traditional radio, but we can also kind of move in a more digital kind of space and play around in that space as well.
Yeah, I agree. Similar to the Y app, the 5FM app has got a very, very similar makeup, and a lot of people use it. But I think it's Norta. Thanks for the question. I think the key thing to understand, if we're going to try and get listeners to get devices, the very few people buy exclusively radio devices anymore. People buy multifunctional devices. And one of the great challenges of a smartphone, if you're going to try and rival it, is that a smartphone can do virtually anything because it is such a flexible and all-encompassing device, which means that if you use the smartphone plus the internet, you can make an app or you can make a streaming service or whatever you want. I think the key, and I don't know if this will ever happen, I can't imagine the amount of lobbying that it would take to influence the international motor vehicle industry, but like, so many people listen to the radio in their cars, and if the car radios are created to receive the kind of technologies that you are looking for with new kind of frequencies, then it will be just as convenient to get into to listen to those radio stations as any other radio stations that people currently listen to. If you don't make it that convenient, it is very unlikely that anybody would go out and buy a radio just to hear that thing. We know how picky listeners are, unfortunately. So we know the long-running struggles of AM radio anywhere in the world, and that's just purely on a quality thing. Even though you can hear everything that's happening on AM radio, it's just not as crystal clear a frequency as FM is. And so you really need to make hyper-convenient products for listeners to use that are of similar quality. And I think car radio, if they pick up that tech, it can make a big difference.
Thank you everybody for all your responses. I just want to see if there are any other questions from the audience or comments, any thoughts on empowering the
Fancy,
youth?
I'm going to jump right in. This is Nadia again, because we're going to have to wrap up. This has been the most interesting, wonderful conversation. I want to express our absolute gratitude to Adrian, Dan, and Nia. You guys are amazing. We are going to have this recording available. Remember, this was a membership. This is a members organized webinar. So this was not an external facing. But the wonderful thing about the work that we do is all of this collaboration, sharing, really in the best interest of the industry's continued growth. So thank you for your time. Thank you for your passion. Thank you for your commitment. I also want to say that we need to celebrate youth. We need to celebrate all of you. We need to celebrate how far we've come, and we know we have a very long way still to go. We also need to celebrate people who invest in doing so much more in terms of education, training, development. Dan, lovely that you've done the Masters in Radio. I think we need to keep pushing that. I think we need to recognize that it's young people who are going to take this medium forward. So thank you for your time and for being here today. To the NAB members, thank you. We appreciate it. There'll be more webinars. Thank you, Offensive, for organizing this. As I said, the link will be available, and you can then go back, listen to these incredible insights and wonderful nuggets. You've all been amazing. Thank you. Have a lovely, lovely day.
Thank you, everybody. Adrian, Nia, Dan, thank you so much, and the teams at YFM, 5FM, and Bush Radio for helping arrange this. We really appreciate it. And I hope you've been having a great youth month, and I hope you found this insightful. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Cheers, everybody.
Thanks. Bye, guys.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.